Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Thursday, August 28th, 2025, and today we're playing a little Mulch matchmaker. We get some specific winter-killed cover crop scenarios broken down, and pillbugs in the seed trays? No thank you. So let's do it. All right, happy Thursday, everyone. I hope you all are doing well. I did the live yesterday, obviously, which shouts to everyone who stopped by for that. Great questions in there, y'all. I also, I harvested some basil, as I said towards the end of that. Took an order to our friends up at Locals in Frankfurt and got a handful of cleanup projects done on the farm. Then, of course, I watched my Albion play, which was satisfying. So not the most farmy of days, but it is basically September, so the farm stuff is slowing down anyway. With that in mind, as we are inching towards September, and September is the month I started this exact show last year, I thought we could do something fun to celebrate. Now, I know we have some musicians who follow this show, and here's what we would love to do. We would love if some of you musicians would cover the theme song for us, and we could play it here on the show. Now, don't violate any contracts you have with your labels or whatever, make sure to ask them first. But if you are independent and can play, send us a video or recording of you covering the theme song, instrumental, a cappella, whistling. You can even add lyrics, whatever you want. We will link your Spotify or whatever you want to in the show notes and give you a shout out. I don't expect one cover each day. That would be 22 or 25 or something. But if we could get 5 or 10 for the month of September, that would be so rad. So musicians, please record your version of the theme song and send it to farmermike@notillgrowers.com, and we will slip it into the show throughout the month of September. You rock. Maybe, in this case, even literally. All right, as is our tradition on Thursdays, I will be taking 3 Patreon questions to help make sure we stay relatively caught up over there. I know I say that I take questions from everywhere that questions come in, but our Patreon page has grown so much, it's hard for me to do anything but answer those to stay up to date on them. But with that said, if you appreciate this work and are down to chip in a couple bucks a month and have a burning question about gardening or farming, Patreon is the way to get it to me. Like all of our content, we try to keep it free and open to the public so that anyone and everyone of any means can access the information. So even if you just watch or listen for the stories at the end, which are all true, by the way, fun fact, you can chip in just to make sure anyone and everyone can always get this info. And also, as a bonus, you get your question answered. So anyway, our first Patreon question of the day comes to us from Nikos Siropoulos. I have no idea if I'm saying that, but my version is very fun to say. Anyway, Nikos writes, quote, "Hi Jesse, I'm a home gardener on the Oregon coast, zone 9B, and am struggling to settle on a specific type of mulch for my vegetable garden. I have tried straw, compost, and redwood pine needles, and none of them have been particularly ideal yet. We have a unique climate here, about a third of a mile from the ocean, that is mild temperature-wise while being extreme weather-wise. Summers seldom get hotter than 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Winters seldom get below 30 degrees Fahrenheit. Most of the year, there is a lot of rain except the summer when there's almost none, and it is relentlessly windy, so a lot of our beds are under cold frames for protection. Mainly, I've been looking for a mulch that helps retain moisture in our very sandy soils during the summers, but when I use straw, the trifecta of slugs, pillbugs, and earwigs reaches plague-like proportions, and they decimate my greens, the crops I tried to grow most here. When I use compost as mulch, on the other hand, the pests are more manageable, but the surface seems to dry out so quickly that it makes me worried. I'm using drip irrigation for what it's worth. We've also used pine needles from a redwood tree we have here, but they have been poor at retaining moisture, and the pests are still rampant. It seems like compost as a mulch is the way forward because I actually get crops, but maybe I change my watering practices. That'd be a bummer because I just installed drip irrigation everywhere this year. But yeah, if I use compost as a mulch, should the surface be allowed to dry out? Using straw as a mulch makes it much easier for me to gauge the moisture content of the soil because it's a distinct layer from the soil, and I can simply pull it back to observe a dry or moist soil surface. But with compost as a mulch, it's harder for me to gauge what layer of soil depth should remain wet. Another option I've been considering is living mulch in the form of crimson clover with my brassicas. Anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks so much for everything you and your team do." End quote. All right, so great stuff here. Great question, and thank you for it. And indeed, indeed, this can be one of the complicated things about a one mulch fits all size approach to gardening. Not all mulches make sense all year round in every place. Like for us, for instance, a compost mulch makes a ton of sense in this fall, winter, and early spring, but honestly, in the heat of the summer, the dark compost can be a little too hot for certain crops like lettuce, which prefer to grow on a lighter, less painfully hot surface. So for you, like it is for us, I might suggest a more dynamic approach where you are perhaps relying on the compost mulch through the wetter times of the year, as compost does tend to be a bit hydrophobic, i.e. water repellent, depending on the coarseness, and then perhaps either covering that with straw during the wetter times, or perhaps just lightly working it into the top 2 inches of the soil well above the rhizosphere, where these soil particles will help retain moisture in the compost layer. That may seem a bit counterintuitive maybe to some extent, but that should help a bit with the moisture retention issue, so long as you keep it cultivated. Also, it will help with your drip issue, because drip on compost mulch is, it doesn't really have the same effect as it does on soil, where it spreads on soil, and on compost it just drops straight down until it gets to the native soil. So it doesn't have that same saturation effect. Now, you might also have the option of a lasagna approach, where you are layering straw and compost to build up those beds, which can be done in the beginning or more slowly over time, just one layer of straw in the summer, then you go back to compost in the winter, et cetera, et cetera. I've seen growers like Jared Smith at Jared's Real Food in San Diego having success doing that in a very dry climate and utilizing drip tape for moisture. One thing I also like about the lasagna approach is that the carbonaceous layer of straw better manages nutrient overloads provided by the heavy compost applications. It's also possible to simply reduce the amount of compost mulch you are using, so that checking the moisture in the native soil beneath it will be easier, and so you don't have a thick layer of dry compost to try to plant something into, which is tough. Once weeds are reduced, the applications of compost mulch do not need to be quite as heavy. Anyway, those are the things that come to mind with this question. You can try the living mulch thing, but just start small this season or next season and trial it lightly to see how it goes. It may help, but also dealing with the drip irrigation after the crop is done could be a challenge. Anyway, great question, and listeners, feel free to add your insight. Let us know in the comments section what you think. Otherwise, we're going to take a quick break, and when we return, we talk about some specific winter-killed cover crop scenarios. BRB.
Hey, Jesse. This is the 4th basket of tomatoes I picked off of 8 bushes. This is a first-year garden, and I took no-till to the extreme. I cleared the bed with the weed eater to bare dirt and then planted. That was all I did. And then put grass clippings down for mulch. And this basket weighs 16 pounds. This is the 4th basket I've gotten in the last 2 weeks.
Farmer Claire Coleman here from the Winter Growers Podcast. Did you know that I also founded Real Farmer Care, a nonprofit that supports farmer well-being? From my own experiences farming, I knew firsthand that this type of support was missing from ag, so I decided to do something about it. As of today, there are over 500 farmer recipients of a $100 self-care award, with more applying daily. If you'd like to help, each $100 donated supports one new farmer. Visit realfarmercare.com to donate and learn more. Again, that's realfarmercare.com.
If you, the listener, are enjoying this podcast, getting even a small amount of value from it, consider supporting our work over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. I will try to get to questions from everywhere the questions come in, but I will always get you your Patreon questions. Now, today's second Patreon question comes to us from Patreon member Lee Kossip, who writes, quote, "Would love your thoughts on the best winter kill Zone 7B cover crop for the period between when the last cash crop finishes and regular hard frosts, something that will grow for a bit, die when frosts come, and then lay on top of the soil as a mulch throughout the winter. Of course, a mixed recommendation would be great too. Thanks for being awesome." End quote. Thank you, Lee. Thank you for being awesome. Now, we have done some winter killed cover crops information stuff lately here on the podcast as we head into the fall season. So instead of sort of repeating that info too much, I thought I would just give some specific examples of how to approach this. Again, though, the basics are that here in Kentucky Zone 6B, I like to have my winter killed cover crops, things like peas, in the ground by mid-September, but not a whole lot earlier or later, really right around the 15th. If you're in a colder climate, you are probably at that date now and over the next week or so. If you are in a warmer climate than us, that still gets hard frost, probably like you here, Lee. You probably still have some time. Between mid and late September is usually good to go there. Any earlier and you risk getting peas and thus weed seeds. So not great. So the first thing to determine what you can plant is to look at what is in the ground now. or what will be in the ground around the time that whatever that time is for you, that last planting date for winter-killed cover crops. So let's take a bed of late tomatoes, for instance. If you have tomatoes that are still producing well into the fall like we do, and the beds are relatively clean, that could be an opportunity to sow something like peas and oats around them, allowing those to grow a bit as the tomatoes sort of trail off. Then later you can remove the trellising and kind of let the cover crop take over. In this scenario, you have sort of relayed the cover crop into the cash crop, or you can do that with peppers or okra or whatever the crop may be. Now, if it's something like a fall broccoli, a winter-killed cover crop is going to be a little harder because, the winter-killed cover crop is likely to overtake the broccoli. So in a situation like that, you could sow a winter hardy cover crop like crimson clover that is relatively low-lying, or possibly something like teff that too stays relatively short so long as the broccoli is fairly mature already. Or you could just plant some greens beneath the broccoli and get a second crop like lettuce or spinach or even arugula. And then both the broccoli and the greens will eventually die in the freezes, though the spinach may hang on depending on your conditions. Another scenario might be something like sweet potatoes. For those, not planting them as a cover crop, but after the sweet potatoes. For us, those come out at the end of September, for instance. So it's a little late for like a winter kill cover crop at that point to be worth it. So we usually sow that section to a winter hardy cover crop. However, you could also sow that to something like one of those aforementioned greens, which will hold the soil in place, grow well into the fall, at least in our climate, but be quite delicious for a bit, and then die in the winter, giving you a very light mulch to help hold the soil in place. Getting the requisite biomass just might be a little bit complicated. Like, you're not going to get a lot of above ground plant matter to cover the soil as you get later and later into the season, because the abundant growth just isn't there without the abundant sunlight. For instance, it's my plan this week to sow some summer cover crops that will turn into winter-killed cover crops, where we had some melons this year because it's too early for my peas still. But there is still plenty of time to get good biomass from my summer stuff. So we may as well get that in there and protect and feed that soil. I should also emphasize that oats won't reliably winter-kill in our region unless you get them in early enough. So I generally avoid the pre-mixed winter-killed cover crop mixes that seed companies often sell, so that I'm not forced to sow oats later than I want if a crop goes longer than I expected. In fact, I generally avoid mixes, save for rye and vetch, because I kind of like to just make my own mix depending on what the situation is at the time. And sometimes I don't want to just kind of like broadcast it all. Sometimes, like maybe in the tomato example, I need to use a seeder to ensure I get seeds below the surface for the best germination. Or maybe I want to broadcast the crimson clover, but then seed over top of that with something else. In fact, if it's something like crimson clover, though, which might only be a winter-killed cover crop in much colder regions than ours, I can sow that one right on the surface and just lightly rake it in without too much trouble. So anyway, clover's cool like that. It gets me. It understands what I need. Anyway, I hope there was something helpful in there, Lee. Otherwise, we're going to take a quick break, and when we return, pillbugs in the seedling trays. Be right back. All right, if you're watching on YouTube, this is a tray of primed spinach, meaning I soaked it overnight in a compost extract and then sowed it into trays. This is unprimed spinach. So germinating spinach in the heat. Primed is like 95% germination in this tray. Unprimed, maybe 30. Yeah, so it makes a difference. Today's episode is brought to you by Farmhand. We know it's peak season, you're busy, but the messages you send now are what drive renewals later. That's why Farmhand is offering free instant access to their farmer-built newsletter builder. No demos, no setup fees, just drop your logo, upload your list, and start sending farm-branded emails that boost sales, engage members, and save you hours each week. Get free access today at farmhand.partners/no-till. That's farmhand.partners/no-till. All right, back to the show. All right, our third and final Patreon question of the day comes to us from Chris Miller, who writes, quote, Jesse, having a great summer season so far, but in the last few weeks have really been struggling with seed trays and pillbugs. They are wiping out an entire tray overnight the second it germinates. Trays are on the table beside my hoop house where I've never had any issues prior. What can I do to help rid myself of these things? End quote. All right, interesting question here, Chris. Thank you. And I would be curious to know if it is indeed pillbugs. If it's happening that fast, like overnight, my guess is that it would be a mouse or some equivalent. And the pillbugs are getting, sort of set up here. Now, assuming it is the pillbugs, though, like you've caught them, I wonder if the trays are on or near a layer of carbonaceous mulch like hay or straw, or arguably their favorite, wood chips. You said they were on a table, but does that table bump up against like any of that stuff? If so, that is going to be at least part of the problem. They are not likely to climb all the way up onto a table, for instance, to get a handful of plants in a tray. But if that tray has an abundant food source or habitat like wood chips all around it, then they have no reason to differentiate between the tray and anything else. So my first recommendation would be to consider the environment of the trays. If they are too close to a habitat or food source like wood chips or even just rocks that stay wet, move that table to a less accessible place. That would be less worth their while to climb. Also, clean the table well above and below it to make sure that there are no nooks or crannies where they can just kind of like wait it out. They like just being covered, and they like it to be, in a wet, moisture area. Now, also consider, unless you have caught them red-handed or green-mouthed, I guess, that it could be something like a mouse doing the decimating here. Mice, and this is undisputed scientific consensus, are the worst. They will devour trays of seedlings like someone, probably the oil industry, but I can't prove it, paid them to do it. Like, who eats baby peppers? Mice. That's who. So just as a matter of prevention, make sure the trays are inaccessible so no big creatures can access them and so no tiny creatures can be tempted by them. Also consider it could be birds. Birds will come in and just pick them out, but you would probably know that because you would see the seedlings kind of emptied out and sitting on top of the soil blocks or whatever you're using. If you do all of that and still have problems, for the pill bugs, you could consider tape around the legs of the card table or whatever you're using. They won't cross it if they get stuck to it, or even a small bottom watering moat around the trays that will help deter them because they are not necessarily fans of swimming. Also, trays can provide a nice habitat for them because they're regularly moistened. So bang off the trays, onto the ground just to kind of knock them off the bottom, and that will help keep those populations down. Anyway, I hope there was at least something helpful in there. Otherwise, it's the end of this Thursday episode as we know it. Don't forget, No Till Growers is now officially a nonprofit 501c3, so donations are tax deductible and greatly appreciated. You can learn more about how to do that in the show notes. Please make sure to like and subscribe and or follow wherever you are getting this podcast. That's an easy way to help us out as well. Enormous thank you to all of our show sponsors. And if you'd ever like to sponsor the show, you can reach out to Farmer Michelle at notillgrowers.com. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music and Mike Hilbert for the production help and editing. Also, shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music that you can hear and will help me let rest my voice for like 5 seconds. Shouts to that. Pick up a hat or one of these beanies that you can kind of see behind me at notillgrowers.com to support this work, or a copy of the Living Soil Handbook, which also goes to doing more of these shows. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/notillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or you sign up in the month of August, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs today to Yao King. Shouts to you, Yao. All right, so as you will remember, our friend Clatter the cat was stalking a small but familiar looking and certainly delicious looking prey in the farm stand when she was suddenly roped, and when she woke up, she found herself in a wooden cage in the forest. She tried her best to bust out, of course, and use some significant cat profanity, but eventually she just kind of wore out. That is when she was approached by the creature she had been stalking, who, for reasons that bend the rules of science for narrative's sake, she could understand what they were saying perfectly. And he could understand her as well. The creature looked exactly like one of her human servants, and although she had temporarily delighted in the idea that she may be able to eat one of them, was currently annoyed at her confinement, so she decided to listen to the creature. The creature told her, "Look, I have a deal to make with you. We are in the middle of a war and need some help because we are losing. If you will help me to fend off this rival tribe, I will funnel you a new creature to chase every single day. But," he emphasized, "no eating my fellow fairies." We cool with that? Clatter, offended by the idea that she was being asked anything of, but interested in the idea of chasing some of these creatures, agreed. And that is for tomorrow on the Clatter Battles. That's kind of fun to say. Anyway, thanks for watching and/or listening. We'll see you then. Bye.
But if you mind to ramble still, I'll tell you how to do. Keep your money in your pocket.